Try to remember your first birthday. Try to remember the sound of your mother's voice when you were 8 months old. Try to remember the first time you saw snow, or tasted chocolate, or heard your own name. You can't. You might have a photo. You might have a story someone told you so many times it feels like a memory. But the actual experience is gone. And the strange part is, it isn't gone because you were too young to notice things. It's gone for a reason far stranger than that. Your brain was working perfectly the day you were born. It was already listening. It was already learning. A newborn can recognize its mother's voice within hours of birth. A newborn can tell the difference between its native language and a foreign one just by the rhythm of speech. So the equipment was there. The forgetting is not a malfunction. It is something your brain chose to do, on purpose, and scientists have spent over a century trying to figure out why. This is called infantile amnesia. Sigmund Freud noticed it first back in the early 1900s, and he had his own theory, mostly wrong, involving repressed trauma. But the modern explanation has nothing to do with repression, it has to do with construction. Your brain, in its first few years, is building the machinery it will use to store memories for the rest of your life. And for a while, that machinery simply isn't finished. Here's what almost nobody realizes. The cutoff for early memory isn't a single wall. It's a fog that lifts slowly. Most adults can recall almost nothing before age 2. Fragments start appearing around 3 and 4, but even those early fragments are unreliable, spotty, more like flashes than films. Full story-shaped memories, the kind where you remember a whole day in order, don't really stabilize until around age 7. Why does it take that long? The answer lives in a seahorse-shaped structure buried deep in your brain called the hippocampus. This is the part responsible for taking a moment you're living through and filing it away as a long-term memory. In infancy, the hippocampus is still growing new neurons at an extraordinary rate. Researcher Paul Franklin at the Hospital for Sick Children in Toronto ran a series of studies on this exact question using mice. His team found that during infancy, the hippocampus produces so many new neurons so quickly that it actually disrupts the circuits holding older memories in place. The very act of growing a smarter brain wipes the whiteboard clean as it goes. Think about that for a second. Your brain wasn't failing to save your first years. It was overwriting them on purpose to make room for a better filing system. There's a second piece to this puzzle, and it has nothing to do with neurons. It has to do with language. Psychologist Catherine Nelson, who spent decades studying how children develop memory, proposed that autobiographical memory, the kind where you can tell a story about yourself, requires something a baby simply doesn't have yet: a sense of self as a character who exists across time. A 1-year-old lives entirely in the present moment. There is no me yesterday or me tomorrow in that mind. Just now. And you cannot store a memory as something that happened to me until you understand that there is a continuous me for things to happen to. This is where language becomes the missing ingredient. As a toddler starts using words like I and me and mine, and starts hearing parents narrate the day back to them, remember when we went to the park? Remember when you fell down? Something remarkable happens. The child begins learning the shape of a memory before they're fully capable of forming one independently. Psychologist Robin Fivish has spent her career studying this, and her research suggests that children whose parents talk with them in rich, elaborate detail about shared experiences develop earlier and stronger autobiographical memories than children whose parents don't. In other words, memory isn't just something that happens inside your skull. It's something that gets built, in part, through conversation. So by the time you're old enough to actually hold onto a memory in story form, two systems have to be working together. A hippocampus mature enough to file the experience away permanently, and a sense of self mature enough to know that the experience belongs to you. Before that point, information can go in briefly, but there's no stable place for it to live and no narrator yet to claim it. Here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. Just because you can't remember your early years doesn't mean they didn't shape you. This is the twist almost nobody talks about. The forgotten years are doing some of the heaviest lifting of your entire personality. Attachment researchers have shown that the way you were held, soothed, responded to, or ignored in your first 2 years of life quietly wires your expectations about relationships for decades to come. You won't remember the specific night your mother came running the moment you cried, but your nervous system remembers that comfort was reliable. You won't remember the specific silence if no one came, but your nervous system remembers that too. None of it exists as a story you can tell. All of it exists as a pattern you live inside. This is sometimes called implicit memory, and it is completely different from the story memory you use to recall your 10th birthday party. Implicit memory shows up as instinct, as the flinch you don't understand, as the specific way you calm down or don't, as why certain smells, certain tones of voice, certain kinds of silence hit you harder than they should, with no memory attached to explain why. You are, in a very real sense, being steered by a version of yourself that you have never met and will never consciously recall. Now think about your own children, or your future children, or the children in your life right now. There is a temptation to believe that if a baby won't remember something, it doesn't matter. Skip the bedtime routine tonight, it's fine. They won't remember. Let the argument happen in front of the crib, it's fine, they won't remember. But the science says the opposite. The years they will never consciously recall are precisely the years doing the deepest architectural work. Not remembering isn't the same as it not counting. There's one more twist, and it might be the strangest one. Adults who believe they remember detailed events from before age 2 are, according to memory researchers, almost certainly wrong. Studies on so-called very early memories have found that most of them are actually reconstructions, built later from photographs, family stories, or home videos, then mentally relabeled as a first-person memory. Your brain is remarkably good at building a memory out of a story it was simply told enough times. This isn't lying. It's just how memory works. It fills gaps the same way it fills everything else, with the most plausible available material. So when you try, right now, to picture your first birthday and something flickers, a cake, a candle, a room, ask yourself honestly whether you're remembering it or whether you've simply seen the photo so many times that your brain built a memory to match it. Here's the reframe. You spent your first several years of life without a working camera. Not because your brain was weak, but because it was under construction, tearing down and rebuilding its own storage system, while frantically absorbing more information per day than it will ever absorb again at any other point in your life. The forgetting wasn't a flaw. It was the cost of upgrading. So tonight, when someone asks you to remember your first birthday, and you can't, don't think of it as a gap. Think of it as proof that something enormous was happening in there, something too important to slow down for storage. You weren't there to remember it. You were too busy becoming the person who eventually could.